Hello everyone! Live Steel is on the air. Alexander Evsev, that's me, and Dmitry Nikiforov. Today he's here with us in the studio. Dima, hi.
Hello everyone.
Thanks for coming. He shared some interesting things in previous podcasts, so we invited him again, as they say, by popular demand. Dima, there's a topic I'd like to discuss with you. Look, when we talk about muscle growth in general, right, that's really the main thing here. Everyone at the gym is always chasing after getting a bit more muscular. Some people just want a little, some want a lot, but everyone wants to build muscle. But let's take identical conditions. For example, you and I are working out together. Of course, we're a bit different, but let's say we're both training our biceps. We're following the same workout program, the same volume, just training according to the same system. We're eating the same way. Now, my biceps grew. Let's use this as an example. Mine grew, but his didn't. That would make me feel better. At least a little bit. My biceps grew by 5 centimeters, and yours by just 1 centimeter. So, is it really all determined solely by genetics, how we're going to grow, or is there something else involved here? And in general, how does muscle growth happen? What does it depend on? Is it just a matter of really prioritizing your training, or is nutrition perhaps even more important? If it's nutrition, then what exactly? Some people say protein is important. Others say it's impossible to grow without carbohydrates. Let's talk specifically about muscle growth. Let's discuss what affects muscle mass growth.
Well, look, let's get started then. Let's start with nutrition, because nutrition is truly fundamental. How important is nutrition here, really? And I'll say this, in order to achieve sufficient muscle growth, first of all, you don't necessarily need to eat a lot. That is, there should be an adequate, but not excessive surplus. And when? Well, now we can all see and notice this. If before, during the off-season, our athletes looked like powerlifters, and then during prep they turned into bodybuilders, now athletes are increasingly starting to maintain themselves and their physical condition during the off-season so that, in about 3 to 4 weeks, they're fully ready and prepared to step on stage. So, to put it figuratively, I'll try to explain it this way. They try to maintain a low enough body fat percentage that still allows for muscle growth, but at the same time, you don't turn into a pig or let yourself go. The numbers are like this: a sufficient energy surplus, which is about 200 to 400 kilocalories per day, if we're using that as a unit of measurement. And that's enough for muscle growth. We have a lot of theories that aren't backed by any evidence, and we rely only on observations. The same goes for caloric intake. We know that's just a theory.
Well, and then there are a lot of these things. What are we? Furnaces where we burn stuff, and that's calories? That's all nonsense, really. But in any case, at this point, we don't have any other information to go by.
So we use it as a kind of formula that helps us. That is, we understand how the body's biochemical processes work, we understand how physiology works, and we know that with an excess of energy, let's call it that, we increase in size. With a lack of energy, we start to die. There's no other way. That's it, period. I completely agree with you. And for their own convenience, for easier measurement, people started saying kilocalories, then specifying how many are in proteins, how many in carbohydrates, how many in fats, how many are there in alcohol. Yes.
It's roughly calculated. I checked, and there are differences. Even those 4, 4, 9 values are just averages. For example, sometimes it was 4.1, 4.2, and they just rounded everything off. Obviously, if you make a mistake of 10 calories out of 2,000, it won't really make much of a difference. You're talking about those same 200 to 400 calories. The immediate question is, from what?
200 calories from carbs, 200 calories from fat, and 200 calories from protein are completely different. The resulting energy flow in the body is different, because we all know perfectly well that, for example, protein structures practically don't convert into fat components.
It's a theoretically very complex biochemical process, gluconeogenesis, which, in practical terms, doesn't occur in a living organism, but
you'd have to create hellish conditions for that to happen. We gave an example that a person would need to create an enormous protein surplus, and then maybe... Because this also means an energy surplus, and since we've created it from protein, it's possible that a small fat component might appear. If we're talking about 200 kilocalories from fat, they go straight into fat stores because fat first goes into fat depots, and only then does the body extract it from there as energy. If we're talking about carbohydrates, and here we're going to get a bit nitpicky, then what kind of carbohydrates are we talking about? Let me explain what I mean. For example, if you drink Lipton, that will be a direct and rapid intake of approximately 200 units of energy from carbohydrates, and they will right away enter our body's energy metabolism. If we take, say, buckwheat, mixed with psyllium, for example, we end up with a total of 200 kilocalories of energy. We understand that just like with protein, a certain percentage will be spent on thermal processing and digestion. So depending on the complexity of the product, there will be these slight changes in how the food is broken down, but it will still be the same energy. But in the end, we'll get slightly different numbers. So if we eat 200 grams of sugar, for example, that's immediately pure energy. But when we eat, for example, well, let's say green buckwheat, for instance, it will be a bit less. Not cooked. A bit less? Yes, exactly, dry, I agree with you.
Not cooked?
That will be a bit less. So we need to take these factors into account as well. And if we create a surplus from protein, in the end, we might see that the person is actually not in a surplus, but might even end up in a slight deficit. Then, of course, that's not enough for muscle growth, because as long as we're living organisms, as you rightly said, and yes, it's clear that these are certain theories that haven't been proven. No, they didn't say for sure that that's it. Yes, 200 kilocalories, that's exactly how it works for a person, and that's it. Because the guy who invented the calorimeter, I forgot his name, sorry, you can look it up online. He took two identical apples, I think you know this story, same variety, same weight. He put them in, one gave 180, the other gave 210. And he was like, well, makes sense. And that's why they created these, reference values. So even when manufacturers indicate on the packaging that there are a certain amount of proteins, fats, carbohydrates, plus a certain amount of energy, they say these are approximate values that can vary right away. By order of the Russian Federation, we also have a 20% margin. So basically, the manufacturer has the right to mislead the customer by 20 to 30%, because who the hell knows? They themselves aren't even sure if that's the exact number. We've taken all these factors into account, we've calculated everything, we've created a surplus, and if we're doing it with protein, most likely we won't gain anything at all in terms of muscle mass, because our muscle structure will still develop under favorable conditions. That is, you need to create certain greenhouse conditions for muscle growth.
Even considering that muscle mass essentially is actually a protein structure. In other words,
of course.
It's just that there are some guys, not that they're stupid or anything, it's just that, logically speaking, when you think about it, since muscle is a protein structure, it means you need to increase the surplus and create it through protein so that there is something to build with, So to speak, have the bricks to build those muscles with. The idea is something like this. Why would I need, say, gasoline for a car if I haven't loaded any bricks into the car? Carbohydrates are basically the gasoline, but if I haven't loaded any bricks, then there's nothing to build with. Even if you put 10 cans of gasoline next to the car, if there are no bricks, there's nothing to build. That's the kind of thinking they have.
It's an interesting idea, but let me tweak it a bit and make it more advanced. Siluyanov, I think, had a really cool experiment where they completely immobilized one leg and worked out with the other. At the same time, they didn't change anything in the diet on purpose. So what did the body do? It transferred the protein structure in the form of amino acids from the immobilized leg to the other one. So you might actually increase your muscle mass in certain muscle groups if you don't work out other muscle groups. The body will literally take it from there and move it here. We were talking about the biceps. It'll take it from the deltoid, steal it, and send it to the biceps. Because you're not using it. If you're not training it, the body will just break it down and send it over here. It all comes down to the chemical composition. It'll break everything down. Our bodies are made of protein structures. How do they get into the body? When you eat protein, it gets broken down into amino acids, and then the body assembles them however it needs.
As it needs to.
This
is a story about collagen.
That's why, in theory, in a very deep theoretical sense, you could increase your muscle mass without being in a carbohydrate surplus, but instead create a surplus of protein. But why does no one actually do this in practice, even though it's possible in theory? Imagine you're preparing for a competition. First, the most reckless athletes, the ones preparing, yes, the most reckless.
God forbid you're getting ready for a competition, and
you have only
the number 11
weeks left, and your coach says, okay, let's try to experiment. And you realize that because of this experiment, you could lose half your form. What if it works? What if it doesn't? And since bodybuilders really love themselves, they won't let themselves try things on themselves that, well, are by no means guaranteed to work. I mean, he understands that he could spend half a year working out on just one protein and maybe not grow at all. And for him, every centimeter, every millimeter is like lighting a candle in a church for good health.
By the way, every millimeter counts too.
Agreed.
Especially in certain places. Because it's all about centimeters, even millimeters.
Of course.
Start calculating.
Exactly. And that's why, in practice, very few people actually do it this way. But there are people who might say on the internet, on Instagram or somewhere else, that, for example, they only eat protein, they don't have any carbs or fats, they look like this, and then they usually add, and I'm natural as well. So, of course, I naturally have questions for such people. How much can we really trust the information they provide? And as someone who works with a large number of people, I can't just take someone's words as the truth without careful consideration. That is, in this regard, I can only trust science. And when science says that unless you have a positive energy balance, that is a surplus, a certain amount of restructuring, your body won't grow, it won't function, it will break down. In other words, if you're not in a surplus, then you're in a deficit. If you're in a deficit, it means you'll be breaking down. There's no other way. It's very difficult to calculate maintenance. Why? One day you take 13,000 steps, the next day 15,000, then you don't walk at all, then you get really stressed, then you overtrain, then you don't train enough. So finding this maintenance balance is also very difficult. That's why when people talk about, when it comes to gaining muscle mass, how do they do it? They say, well, I know for sure that I'm in a surplus. And they add a specific number. And that's it. They don't worry about it. They know they'll grow no matter what. But we understand that if we keep adding fats, we'll immediately be sending that surplus straight into body fat. Why do we need that, considering we'll accumulate it anyway if we're in a surplus? That's why we still aim for gains in our bodies from carbohydrates as the energy source. When we create a surplus from carbohydrates, say those 300 to 400 kilocalories, why is that important to us? All right, let's say you don't eat carbohydrates. Let's imagine you work out at the gym, but to create training volume, you need to have some kind of fuel tank, and it needs to be filled with fuel. And here, without carbohydrates, nothing will work for you at all. But if you're on the same keto diet, for example,
We'll be oxidizing fats.
we'll be oxidizing fats, but can the body really oxidize that much fat so that you can have a good leg workout, assuming you're a healthy bodybuilder? We're not talking about some girl who went on a keto diet and competed somewhere in Nowheresville. We're not considering them because honestly, you'd have to question how hard she was actually training. But when we're talking about a healthy bodybuilder, well, I don't know any bodybuilders who compete in contests while on a keto diet. Real bodybuilders. Those who want to try it, go ahead. That's their personal choice. But when we're talking about gaining mass,
The question is answered right away. Why reinvent the wheel, so to speak? Experiments with the keto diet. Some people find ketosis works for them, some don't. How do you even properly get into ketosis? When you have a proven tool, quick energy in the form of carbs, let's go work out.
and on a biochemical level, it's also very beneficial for the body because you get a surge of energy, it immediately enters the bloodstream, over some time it's converted into glycogen, and then you go train.
Ketosis is basically the body's plan B.
It's for a rainy day, yeah.
It has that capability. In case of some emergency situation, I don't know, like if all the grains on Earth died out or something, whatever. We'll survive on fats somehow. But people have turned it into some kind of tool. It's actually just a backup, emergency way to oxidize fats for extra energy. That's a really
Great way you put it. A backup option is like, when everything in an airplane is duplicated. So if something fails, the plane can still fly on one engine. Because there are certain, let's say,
reliable backup systems that will keep it going and remain essential.
so the same thing happens in our bodies. But why, when we live comfortably in the 21st century, should we use the same things our bodies might have used 300 or however many years before our era, when people were literally surrounded by spears, had no access to food, and the only thing around was a wild turkey running by? Well, there you go. That's the keto diet for you. So in such conditions, the body will...
Or yes, perhaps due to differences in climate, for example. Some people lived in the far north while others lived in the south. Some families grew wheat and others were butchering walruses for food.
That's exactly why the process of evolution exists, because people adapt and adjust to their environment over time. And now, of course, evolution is actually backfiring on us, in a sense, because we're seeing a large number of diseases appearing in the population.
Evolution takes a long time and there are a lot of idiots.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you think that's the result of evolution?
I think so, yes. And that's because people have stopped functioning. They've stopped fulfilling their main functions, like moving, punching people in the face, and so on. And because now everyone is trying to function less, to develop less, since everything is basically available, it also depends on the people themselves. Some people can use these great conditions to develop even further, while others in these same great conditions will just
degrade
because they don't step out of their comfort zone, so to speak.
So, okay, let's say 300 calories, that's the average value. Obviously, for a 120 kilogram bodybuilder and for an 80 kilogram beginner men's physique athlete, the numbers will be a bit different, but let's just take 300 as a rough estimate. Do these 300 calories include protein at all, or do you still need to add some protein? How much protein per kilogram of body weight do you recommend for growth? Well, it's impossible to grow on just carbs without any protein.
To grow. It's impossible. I absolutely agree with you. So how do we look at it? If we check, let's say, by searching on the internet, what are fats, what are proteins, what are carbohydrates? What will it say next to protein? It's a building material, it's the structure of our body, what our entire organism is made of. DNA, everything is made up of protein as well. Hair, eyes, muscles, all of these are protein structures. That's how I'd put it. So we have 20 amino acids, actually even 21 and even 22. I'll mention that in parentheses right away. And it turns out that we're actually talking about these 300 or even 400 kilocalories, assuming, of course, that there's a surplus. That is, we've already reached the ideal values. For example, 1 gram of fat per kilogram of body weight and 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. We've got our numbers, we've added carbohydrates on top up to our maintenance level, so to speak, and whatever we add on top of that will be our carbohydrates. That's why protein absolutely needs to be present in sufficient amounts. And here, look how interesting this is. Science says that for muscles to grow, it's enough during the off-season, when there's an energy surplus. There are almost 1.8 grams of protein per body weight. In principle, that's enough already. I have a slightly different approach to this. I always take into account the error, and I think it should be 2 grams in any case. That's it. If you're pumping iron, there should be at least 2 grams if you're training hard. Because, well, you know how to play it safe. This is how I feel about it. Although, when I was in medical school, I ate very little protein on purpose, and I even noticed some positive things depending on this. But it's difficult to say that it was specifically the protein and not because I improved my regimen. That is, to track why the process was positive. So right now I'm practicing...
Listen, the process my digestion normalized.
That is, my gastrointestinal tract started working better, or I started sleeping better. So this is what I do. 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and the process started. That's it, and you go into a surplus, you start bulking up. If we're talking about a deficiency of components, say someone is preparing for something and needs it urgently, I have people who eat 3.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. I don't see anything wrong with that, but I approach it individually. For example, I have a girl who eats 3 to 5 grams of protein per kilogram. A girl, when you ask her, well, how are you handling this? She says, I don't care. So why should I forbid her when with that amount of protein? She eats an average amount of carbohydrates, and we get a great physique.
Someone's already writing, her kidneys will fail.
The kidneys won't fail. But again, according to the latest research, provided the person is healthy, a healthy person with healthy kidneys.
Now someone will say, there are no healthy people, only those who haven't been fully examined. All the comments are already prepared in advance. Go check
Your kidneys and see for yourself. So what I personally saw on the internet was that people were actually given as much as 6 grams of protein per kilogram of their body weight for a period of 2.5 months. Yes, the studies are indeed short, and 2.5 months isn't considered a long period of time. But still, for those 2.5 months, when you're consistently consuming 6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, you would expect something to go wrong, but surprisingly nothing did happen. In the end, we saw absolutely healthy people whose bodies didn't change at all. The only thing is, you're just peeing out protein, that's all. That is, all the excess protein that your body doesn't absorb, you just flush it down the toilet. It just turns out to be very expensive. Why did I consume so much protein? Because the person was feeling hungry, and I didn't want to reduce the carbohydrates since they were in preparation, so we started adding more protein. By increasing protein, we created an even greater surplus. So we were hitting 2 birds with 1 stone, because don't forget about the thermic effect. Protein is 30%. And as the person increased their protein intake, they started to feel satiated, physiologically satiated. So we're not talking about emotional hunger right now. That's always an issue for athletes. We're talking purely about physiology here.
the person was in a surplus. You were saying was feeling hungry. Yes, I'm going to nitpick here. Was feeling hungry, and you added more protein, and he went even further into a surplus. I
could have meant deficit. That's what I said. No.
The person was already in a deficit, was feeling quite hungry, and then you added some protein, and as a result, he went even further into a deficit. Why would that be?
Let me explain. Look.
Even if we take the amount of protein, the number of calories, we take a 30% thermic effect, but 70% of the calories still remain for him.
Wait, look how interesting this is, but we do understand what happens when we eat protein.
It's one thing if, for instance, you proportionally replace the amount of carbohydrates with protein based on calories, then yes, that would be a very good approach.
But we do understand that protein does not turn into fat. That is, it doesn't get used as an energy source. So where does it go then?
Where does it go?
What happens to what was given?
It doesn't get absorbed. 30 grams of protein at a time. This theory is correct. Not
Under any circumstances.
Not digestible. That
What they attributed to him, 4 kilocalories they attributed to him. But if it doesn't go into energy, if it doesn't go into fat,
component, it doesn't become muscle or fat, some kind of plastic fat. It gives
some kind of plastic structure, but the excess will be eliminated. But the fact is, we created so much protein that about 70% is just excreted. That's it. She absorbed her 2.5 grams of protein, and the rest was eliminated. But she did eat it. She did feel full.
but that's satiety, yes. And
We're only talking about satiety. So the fact that she was in a surplus, she was hungry, we decided not to cut carbs, we just added a lot more protein, she simply felt fuller, and that was it. There was no other benefit.
here's a question, for example. If, for instance, a person is on, let's say, for example, a deficit, for instance, they need to have 1,200 calories. But if they're in a surplus, say, let's make it 1,600, for example. If a person gets all 1,600 calories entirely from protein, would they technically be considered in a deficit? Let's set those conditions. For example, he eats squid for 1,600 or even 2,000 calories. In terms of calories, he would be in a surplus, but he would lose weight if it's pure protein.
Without any fats,
He's eating squid, just squid. It's not just that he would lose weight. All day long,
he'd be peeing out expensive protein and of course still be in a deficit. You can do this experiment on yourself. Since you work out, you train, you do it for yourself. Let me put it this way, train is not the right word. It's a professional quirk. Try the experiment. Start eating only chicken breast. But make it 4,000 calories. Just start eating chicken breast for 4 grand worth of calories. You'll see changes in the mirror right away. Immediately. First you'll lose water weight and then the fat burning processes will start. That's how it works. Why doesn't anyone eat a lot of protein? Because they're afraid for their kidneys and so on and so forth. Plus, due to certain physiological aspects of our bodies, I think it's a problem of disorders, eating behaviors, gastrointestinal issues, and some chronic ailments. Most people who switch to a higher protein intake experience digestive problems. Things like indigestion, bloating, and so on start happening. So this approach definitely doesn't work for everyone.
and if you have something like Helicobacter, it doesn't work at all. So for example, if we maintain, say, 1,500 calories in a deficit, let's say hypothetically this number is already close to the body weight required for maintenance. At first, the body keeps losing weight, and then, for example, 1,500 calories becomes the maintenance level. And if we leave the same 1,500 but increase the protein component, then we will give a start to,
The significant current deficit.
yes, sure, let's just change the ratio of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates.
Everything is correct. And this is what happens to me in my wards. The only limitation is the girl's digestive system, the boy's digestive system, and how much I can actually increase the protein. I have 2 girls, for example, who basically eat 1.8 or 2 grams, and that's already a problem. So what am I supposed to increase for them? In that case, I have to cut the total energy intake and, well, let them go hungry. There's nothing else you can do about it, right? Sorry, that's just how your gut is. If you want to perform well, fix your gut, then there won't be any problems. You probably remember when we had Kai Green visit us at SN Pro, if I'm not mistaken. Did you see how he was eating chicken breasts straight from a tray?
No.
He had this huge tray and there were, I don't know, maybe 20 chicken breasts in there, and he would just toss them in just like that. But I really don't think that at that particular moment, he was actually eating that much protein just to increase his muscle mass. Considering that it was a massive amount of protein. First and foremost, protein is used as a plastic material, primarily as a building structure. And then it's actually a really fantastic thing, because it can help you feel less hungry while dieting.
But what if you were to replace the protein component, specifically the expensive protein component that gives you a feeling of fullness, with something else, like fiber, for example?
Look, okay, but just out of curiosity, how much fiber can you actually eat?
And what about the volume it provides? For example, a low-calorie volume gives you a feeling of fullness.
I agree with you, but there are still carbs in it. All right, let's say, whatever, it's a minor detail. Let's agree on that. But how much of it can you actually eat if we're talking about fiber? Look, let's say you ate some extra on top. Half a kilo of chicken is 500 extra kilocalories. 500 kilocalories. If you eat the same amount of kilocalories in psyllium, you'll never be able to go to the bathroom again in your life. They'd have to cut you open because it would expand so much that you just die. And that's why fiber isn't the best option here. Look, you need 30 to 40 grams of fiber per day.
Hey, let me say that it was someone other than me, okay? Mine was painted over. Like when they say something good about me, then say something about someone else.
Donya.
Do you perhaps add fiber?
I do. Not just from vegetables, but I also intentionally add bran and things like that. In general, my attitude towards supplements is that I believe you should get everything from food, and if you're a high-level athlete, then sure, you can add supplements on top. But if you just started going to the gym yesterday, supplements won't make any sense. At least learn how to eat properly first. And only then, depending on how you progress, your level up in the gym, you can start adding some sports supplements if you need them, whether as dietary supplements or something else. That's it. So first and foremost, you need to build a proper nutrition culture and only then move on to everything else. Because people usually do the opposite. First, they gorge themselves on all these supplements, and then they think, damn, what about my proteins, fats, and carbs? What am I supposed to do then? So yes, fiber is definitely important, but I'm not saying you need to use it in some powdered form. I think it's enough to just eat more salad, eat more cabbage. Eat more dill, because it's definitely great for your health. Well, there's asparagus, I really like it. That's it, you got everything, you'll get the full spectrum. Plus, Dima has already discussed this in detail. I'm talking about inulin now. The elements found in vegetables, I'm talking about vitamins and minerals, are absorbed much better when they're inside this structure, rather than when we add them from the outside as supplements, well, dietary supplements. That's why it's much more beneficial to view food as a superior product than as a dietary supplement. You mean that when minerals are part of the food matrix, so to speak, yes, they will be absorbed. I don't remember if Max and I talked about this. I think I need to check. Max might even argue with you about certain forms of supplements. Because, I remembered some vegetables and fruits actually contain certain minerals that are not always present in the best or most absorbable forms. Yes, that's true. And now I remember exactly that's what we were talking about. And if, for example, we have some form of a mineral, say an oxide or sulfate form, then naturally, even though it's inside the food matrix of a living product, adding this mineral as a supplement in some chelated form would be better. That's what the conversation was about. That's great, Marika. But we don't consider a person's food basket as a single food product. So if we only ate potatoes, for example, that would be pretty bad. That's why when scientists talk about it, how do they put it? A balanced diet. And a balanced diet is one where you intentionally include different foods that complement each other. Can you picture that in practice? Yeah, of course, it's not that hard.
Have you seen bodybuilders lately?
Look, the fact that they do it that way is their problem. But actually, creating a balanced diet, if you look up the formulas online, where different vitamins and minerals are found, you might not think you'll end up with a lot of food. That's a huge mistake people make.
But just how varied is it, after all?
Using 4 types of fiber and 4 types of vegetables.
And to track which vegetable contains which form of a vitamin so that it will be properly absorbed later, isn't it easier for me to just take a tablet of a vitamin and mineral complex in chelated form, or to have a few separate bottles? At least then I know everything will be absorbed. For example, in a cucumber, magnesium is in oxide form. Somewhere else it's chelated, somewhere else it's sulfate, and so on, you see? Look.
I completely agree with you, but there's one thing. You treat supplements as something to use only if your diet is already adequate. And sure, go ahead and add them on top, because of course in a cucumber, for example, you won't get as many positive effects as you would from other supplements, the dietary supplements that we use.
A cucumber has Earth's power.
Well, yes, but when we're talking about an ordinary person, they perceive supplements completely differently, not like you do. When you use an anabolic drug, you go work out. If you give an ordinary person an anabolic drug, someone who doesn't know how to train, they won't get any benefit from it. So, let me explain this to you from a pharmacological perspective. It only makes sense to add pharmacology when you've already learned how to train. But if you know how to train hard and then add pharmaceuticals on top of that, you'll be able to get much more benefit. When a person hasn't learned how to eat properly and just takes supplements, they'll think they're deficient in everything. They'll think they're deficient in everything and try to compensate for it everywhere. And this is also a modern delusion people have, that they're deficient in everything. On top of having a completely unbalanced diet, they go to get themselves checked, and then they gulp down handfuls of vitamins, not just 1 or 2, but handfuls. That's the downside. And now we already have evidence of deaths caused by dietary supplements.
Yeah, I've actually heard something about this story somewhere, but it really seems so far-fetched. This whole thing about deaths from overdosing on supplements, the first
cases were recorded in Australia when a certain group of individuals decided to get into biohacking, and they biohacked themselves so much that tragically they all died together in this shocking turn of events.
I guess there have been some wild stories there. They were taking
insane dosages, they were taking huge amounts of drugs, but this is an example of people hoping to become superhuman just by taking supplements. And the modern person, that's how their brain is wired. I don't want to make an effort, I'll just take a supplement instead of eating salad.
But I get it. First of all, yeah. On the other hand, it's better if he takes a supplement, because if you tell him supplements are crap, you'd better sort out your diet, he'll stop taking supplements and won't bother fixing his diet at all. You see, because that's just how it is.
I agree with you. And here you just need to clearly communicate information to people. Supplements exist, you can take them. You can take them, there's nothing bad about them. They really do help people, especially if you have a specific deficiency. For example, if you have an iron deficiency in your body, you won't be able to make up for it with food alone.
No way.
First, you'll need to get an IV or take supplements, and only then can you try to maintain it with food, and even then, it's not guaranteed. Most likely, you'll have to keep getting IVs or something else from time to time. But it's best not to let it get to that point. That's why I say there should be a subject in school, like nutrition culture. When, from childhood, people are taught what they should eat properly.
At least for health. Nutrition science in school, right? The basics of nutrition science. It's actually pretty cool, by the way. Instead of some of the subjects we have now, some extra electives that you end up wondering, why do we even need this? But things that are actually practical, like nutrition science, which is useful for life, for public health. That's a cool thing to have in school, in some classes. Just the basic fundamentals, for example.
That's why I'm talking about nutrition. You see, there's a fine line here that can easily be twisted.
Why did my biceps grow and yours didn't?
Look, we created a surplus, we set the conditions, both of us went to the gym. We both started working out, the surplus came from carbs, we explained why, everything's fine. We're doing the same amount of exercises.
Did we go to the gym together?
Sure.
You gave me a tip and then you got kicked out.
No way. No way, we're far apart, that's why. On Skype. So
that's why your biceps didn't grow. Because you came to work out together, you got kicked out, and I kept working out and helping each other.
In the gym is not allowed. We picked a different gym, not the chain where helping is forbidden. And we started training, creating the same conditions. The most important conditions for muscle growth are mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and the hormones that we produce and release during training. In other words, we need to work out hard enough for our bodies to produce hormones, and then those hormones, once in the bloodstream, reach the muscle tissue.
If you work out, many people say you need to work out, testosterone will increase from physical activity. There is even an opinion that after intense physical exertion, testosterone actually drops.
Yes, that's true. We've heard that even if... Look, we're not even considering testosterone at all. The word hormone doesn't mean testosterone. What I said was hormones, not testosterone. Even if it rose during heavy workouts, how did they do it before? You do squats, then work your biceps, so after leg training, the hormones, the testosterone, go to your biceps and they grow. Yes.
The biceps got it. Testosterone went to the biceps and it grew. Everyone
absolutely doesn't care about that biceps or about all your hormones. After a strength workout, your testosterone levels will return to the same values you started with within 15 to 30 minutes. So here, that's not what we're looking at. We're not talking about some kind of anabolic hormone surge. We're talking about the fact that thanks to training, you've developed a certain hormonal system, hormones that have entered our bloodstream, and they need to reach the muscle tissue so that certain biochemical processes can then take place there. In other words, if this doesn't happen, there won't be any muscle growth. That's it, period. There's no other way for our muscles to grow. So you have to train hard enough for hormones to be produced, for them to enter the bloodstream, and then reach the muscle tissue. Because powerlifters train hard, they have a lot of hormones, but their muscles don't grow the same way as bodybuilders. Both are on pharmacology.
No, you're saying it all wrong. When I first came to the gym about 20 years ago, the guys there told me exactly how you need to work out. Your muscles should get slightly injured like this, then they heal together like this and get thicker.
On top of each other.
On top of each other? Yeah, like scars. So you need to tear them a little, create micro-injuries, just a little. Then they heal, get thicker, and that's how your muscles grow. That's why you need to work out so that it always hurts a little. Everywhere, all the time, for a week after your workout. That's what they told me, that's how muscles grow.
Look, here's what we can do. We take the Elizarov apparatus, which is a specialized medical device, break the bones in someone's legs, carefully stretch them apart for the person who didn't let us film in the gym, and then we simply wait for the bones to heal properly. And like, okay, you agree with me, but for some reason it doesn't work that way with muscles. Then why do people actually work out at the gym if you could just take a tattoo machine, go to town on your biceps, make a bunch of tiny micro-injuries to the muscle tissue, and simply wait for it to grow bigger and stronger over time? That's not how it's done.
Like, the muscle really felt it, and then the brain realized that it simply couldn't handle that amount of weight, so it grew a bit more so that next time it could actually handle it. Something like that, yeah.
Let's try tearing it in a different way then. Let's not make a mechanical tear, but a physical one, and wait for it to heal. According to that theory, you should get a coconut-like callus, so it would grow a bit more and become stronger in that spot.
Stronger, yeah?
Yeah, but that's not how it works with muscles. Muscles grow. Here we have a muscle fiber, not a fibril. It doesn't grow because it tears. It grows in its own volume. So muscle growth happens due to biochemical processes inside. And there are no micro tears happening there. I mean, maybe some kind of micro... It's more like a micro trauma happening inside. But any athlete knows that a microtrauma means you don't go to the gym for a week. If you get a microtrauma in your shoulder, you end up needing surgery, and they start using a laser to fix the ligament that got frayed.
And if you overtrain too much, there's this thing called creatine phosphokinase. CPK levels can be off the charts, which actually means there are a considerable number of micro-injuries occurring within the muscle.
That's already an indicator of an inflammatory process, which in the long run can have a very negative impact on injury recovery. That's why we need to create the right conditions for muscle growth. What are those conditions? There is a clear concept in science. It's called failure or near failure. That's it. That's enough for muscles to grow. And when you and I came to the gym, we read this book, the one that says, let's put it this way, guys. In a rep range from 8 to 25, from 6 to 30, from 10 to 15, if you train to failure or near failure, your muscles will grow. You and I have read this. We know that muscles don't grow any other way. What is the condition of failure or near failure? It's when you're lifting a dumbbell and you can't lift it anymore, you can't lift it, while
maintaining the same technique you use for the first rep throughout the movement,
or your movement speed starts to noticeably slow down, and that's when you've reached muscular near failure, for example. We create the same conditions that cause a hormone to be released into the blood, but how does it actually get into the muscle? That's why earlier I specifically gave you the example of a powerlifter. Powerlifters experience a lot of anabolism during their workouts because almost every training session they have is done in a near-failure state. We're not saying they're working at their 1 rep max, but their training is much harder than in bodybuilding. Single reps or sets of 2, 3, 6, or 8 repetitions. They train extremely hard, the load is very high, and of course there are a lot of hormones released. But these hormones don't actually reach the muscles, they just circulate in the blood for a while and then are simply broken down. And these hormones don't reach the muscle tissue simply because the main signal, the signaling mechanism that triggers it, is missing. And this signaling is triggered by metabolic stress. Now we need to combine the two conditions for muscle growth. And
why powerlifters get metabolic stress?
I'll explain now. There's no acidification. They don't experience acidification. For them, acidification is the worst thing. They do a set and then rest for a long time. They do a set, and he went down to McDonald's, grabbed some food, came back upstairs and did another set. But our goal is to create both factors so that you go to failure and at the same time your muscle burns intensely. Well, it's a very figurative concept just to make it easier for people to understand. So that you experience both acidification and muscle failure. And when you combine these two functions, that's when we get muscle growth, because the hormone is released specifically in response to the lactate that appears in the muscle. And it appears in the muscle due to metabolic biochemical processes. That is, metabolic stress has occurred, certain chemical reactions have taken place, and as a result, hormones are directed specifically to that muscle. Then the hormone enters the muscle tissue, where there are receptors on the muscle structure, and this is where it gets most complicated. Why didn't my biceps grow? First of all, I might have far fewer receptors on the muscle itself. So, the hormone arrives, but only 10% of it is effective, while your sensitivity is off the charts, and everything that came your way was absorbed. Everything was assimilated, and this triggered the next processes. Next, besides the receptors, you have the muscle structure itself. Our muscles are multinucleated structures, not single-nucleus entities. To be precise, so as not to make a mistake, the number of muscle fibers is determined by nature from birth. And when studies were conducted, the research showed that athletes have more myofibrils than the average person. But there's a small caveat. No one has ever taken an athlete at age 7, measured the number of muscle fibers, and then measured again 30 years later to say, oh, it increased. There are more now. They only compared athletes and regular people.
People who had a predisposition went into sports.
Yes, that's all there is to it. And we reject that theory. In other words, we say that this is most likely the case, because when we look at people who just work out at the gym and check the number of muscle fibers they have, we still see a very small amount. And that's probably why they didn't progress further. They simply can't. But
some people don't do any sports, yet they're just huge. You wonder why. Someone like that most likely has, genetically, a lot of muscle. Not even fat, but a big healthy build. There are guys who do nothing, but their traps just grow on their own.
Here is the first receptor we encountered. Next, the number of muscle fibers. And this number of muscle fibers does not break but increases in volume. What do we have sitting on the fibers next? Nucleoli. And the nucleoli also increase in volume several times and further increase in their number on the muscle structure. The moment of increase Here, everything becomes much more complicated, and you have to go deeper.
Is this presented theoretically, right?
This is theoretical.
That the number of nuclei increases.
Look, there used to be a misconception, which I also believed, as many people think, that we have about 200 nuclei. In the biceps, for example, and however many there are, that's how many there will be, and you can't do anything about it. But now we understand that the nuclei increase, their number changes. It can become 300, it can become 400, but to activate them, you need to trigger certain biochemical processes. There might not be enough hormones for which the receptors are currently present, so this factor should also be taken into account. Next, we need to understand that even if we've increased the number of nuclei, they still need to be maintained. And it's also hormones in our blood that maintain them. So if hormone levels drop, the volume will immediately decrease as well. This is an example of when a bodybuilder gets off the needle. That's it. Everything stays in place for him. The myofibrils remain, the nuclei remain. They just stopped functioning. You can't properly stimulate them so that they maintain their muscle volume. And
Since it's too costly for the body to maintain them,
of course it's very costly.
put them away in storage.
Yeah, that's all. They just lock them in a safe and says, I'll use them when better times come. That's it, nothing more. But it doesn't get rid of them. By the way, that's what muscle memory is based on. That is, our nuclei, they increased. Muscle
memory, when a bodybuilder makes a comeback, returns to training, and for some reason rather quickly regains their previous muscle memory. It's all explainable, really.
Yeah, so for us it works exactly like this. Let me explain it to you now. Let's say you had one nucleus in your biceps, then you became a bodybuilder. You started working out, and now you have two nuclei. You stopped working out, but it didn't go anywhere. Only the water disappeared. But all of them stayed, and when you start working out again, you immediately start from two nuclei, not from one. That's it. That's what muscle memory looks like in our body. And what did we run into? We ran into a problem.
Drink it, and it will settle down.
Of course, we ran into a problem with receptors, the number of muscle fibers, which is determined genetically, and the number and sensitivity of receptors. This is already important. We have both the quantity and the sensitivity, and we are very limited in... Not us. I'm limited in my ability to catch up to you. That's all there is to it. No matter how much I work out, chances are I'll never catch up to you. Forget about the muscle fibers. We can increase the nuclei, I can keep working out. And you say, Diamond, buy yourself some kind of pharmaceutical drug. Come on, I'll keep working out naturally, and you go on the gear. I started taking pharmaceuticals just like you and still can't catch up to you. Because the receptors don't respond to the drugs. That's it. No matter how much I inject myself, and we know people like that, and you definitely know them too, who inject themselves with pretty high doses.
That's what I always say when I talk about pharmaceuticals and dosages. For some people, for example, 200 milligrams of testosterone is enough to saturate all their receptors. Yeah, and that's it. But for others, you give them 400, and it just goes nowhere. They simply don't have the capacity to process that much pharmaceuticals. And then there are people who can process 400, 500, even 600. I know a guy like that.
A men's physique competitor, not at the Russian national level, but at regional competitions. 1200 milligrams of testosterone. Men's physique, when you look at him, you think, where the hell do you have 1200 milligrams of testosterone in you? When he says, I've got 1200 milligrams of testosterone in me, and about the same amount, maybe a bit more, of anabolic steroids. And next to him stands a bodybuilder in the 100 plus kilogram category who takes less. That's all there is to it. And there are no questions about the training of that men's physique guy. Basically, when you watch how he trains, you think, that's fine. But you can't say he's just slacking off and never goes to the gym at all. But his body simply can't process that amount of pharmacology, and it never will in his life. Most likely, he'll end up with more negative effects from the drugs on his body. He'll have to treat those issues as well. And on top of that, he'll never really get jacked anyway. So here you have to accept the fact that, well, if it doesn't work out, screw it, I'll just go play badminton. That's how I would approach it. Either keep training, but don't fool yourself thinking you'll break your genetics. And somehow become Ronnie Coleman. No one has become Ronnie Coleman yet.
Genetics will always put you in your place, Igor.
And genetics will always win. Genetics always wins. This whole thing about so-called broken genetics with Dima, and again, especially when remembering the difficult and challenging COVID times, is probably actually, in many ways, a surprisingly good thing. We discussed the interesting and thought-provoking idea that the body... When you stay on a diet for a really long time, eventually you can gradually adapt your physical condition to your current body fat percentage. But those are adaptive things, not your genetics. It's not like you've broken your genetics. You've adapted both psycho-emotionally and physically to the structure of maintaining a low body fat percentage. First of all, it's actually a very long process to fully adapt yourself because your adipocytes or fat cells haven't gone anywhere. They are still present in your body. You've just started filling them with less fat. Plus, you've cleaned up a huge amount of your diet. So, look, you used to be overweight, you had a certain lifestyle, then you changed it, and for a very, 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 very long time, you worked on building your food habits in such a way that your body's fat component would decrease. When you reached that point, you gradually increased your carbs, and we remember a lot of the fat component doesn't go away just from carbs. In this way, he adapted his system and diet, both psycho-emotionally and psychophysically, to the structure of such a diet. But that's adaptation, not a genetic breakdown. It's impossible to break that genetics. As you said, it'll immediately show you where.
Yeah, it'll go exactly there. So, friends bodybuilders, did you get how muscles grow? So, what do you need? You need to work out, you need to eat, you need hormones, you need everything to come together, and you need to be genetically predisposed to it. All the basics, the fundamentals of muscle growth, what your muscle growth depends on, why your buddy at the gym grew his biceps and you didn't. Dima broke it all down for us today and explained everything in thorough and comprehensive detail. Thank you very much indeed. Please write in the comments what other topics you would like us to cover and let us know how much your biceps have grown this year. This was Live Steel. See you next time.
Take care.